Hello everybody, I'm the Mr. C and this is my One Wheel Crisis.
Today we'll be taking a trip through Times Square. Come on along and let's go for a ride. As I was looking through my YouTube stats, I discovered something that I did not realize before. Only 14.9% of my viewers are subscribed. 14.9%. So, several things. I'd like you, the unsubscribed, the 85%, to make my day and hit.
Before and after the American Revolution, the Times Square area belonged to John Moore Scott, who had served under George Washington. Scott's manor house was at roughly 43rd Street. The land was used for farming and breeding horses. Later in the first half of the 19th century, it became a golden egg for John Jacob Astor. His first fortune was made using his fur trade monopoly to smuggle opium into China. But his second fortune was made selling lots to hotels and other real estate gestalts as the city rapidly grew uptown. By 1872, the area had become the center of New York's horse carriage industry, but had not previously been given a name. The city's authorities decided to call it Longacre Square, after Longacre in London, where its horse and carriage trade was centered. Realization of Lower Manhattan pushed homes, theaters, and prostitution northward from the Tenderloin district. Longacre Square gained a reputation as a low entertainment district. The first theater on the square was the Olympia. It was built by the cigar manufacturer and impresario Oscar Hammerstein I. By the 1890s, the stretch of Broadway was alive with theaters, restaurants, and cafes teeming with upper and middle class patrons. And in 1904, the New York Times was moved to a new skyscraper on 42nd Street at Longacre Square, on the site of the former Pabst Hotel. The publisher at the time, Adolph S. Ochs, talked to Mayor George B. McClellan Jr. into constructing a subway station there, and the area was renamed Times Square on April 8, 1904. Just 3 weeks later, the first electrified advertisement appeared on the side of the bank at the corner of 46th Street and Broadway. The New York Times moved again one block west of the square in 1913 and sold the building in 1961. The old Times building was renamed the Allied Chemical Building in 1963, but is now just simply called One Times Square. Advertising also grew significantly in the 1920s, growing from the 25 million to 85 million over the decade. Fritz Lang, after seeing Times Square in 1923, used it as an inspiration for his dark industrial film Metropolis. Entertainment icons such as Irving Berlin, Charlie Chaplin, and Fred Astaire were closely associated with Times Squares in the 1910s through the 1930s. However, it was also during this time that the area was consumed by crime and corruption in the form of gambling and prostitution. One case that garnered huge attention was the arrest and subsequent execution of the police officer Charles Becker for the first-degree murder of Herman Rosenthal in 1912 near Times Square. The atmosphere of Times Square changed with the Great Depression. City residents moved uptown to cheaper neighborhoods, and many of the popular theaters closed, replaced by saloons, brothels, burlesque halls, vaudeville stages, and drug houses. The area acquired a reputation as a dangerous and seedy neighborhood in the following decades. Nevertheless, Times Square continued to be the site of the annual ball drop on New Year's Eve. The ball drop was placed on hiatus for New Year's Eve in 1942 and 1943 due to lighting restrictions during World War II. Instead, a moment of silence was observed at midnight in Times Square, accompanied by the sound of chimes played from moving trucks. As early as the 1960s, 42nd Street between 7th and 8th Avenue was described by the New York Times as the worst block in town. Later that decade, Times Square was depicted in the movie Midnight Cowboy as a gritty, dark, and desperate place. And conditions only worsened in the 1970s and 80s, as did the crime in the rest of the city. And by 1984, an unprecedented 2,300 annual crimes occurred on that single block, of which 460 were serious felonies such as murder and rape. At the time, police morale was low and petty criminals who committed misdemeanors were not being arrested. William Blanton, the New York City Police Commissioner originally in 1994, stated that the New York Police Department did not want high performance. It wanted to stay out of trouble to avoid corruption, scandals, and conflicts in the community. For years, therefore, the key to career success in the New York Police Department was to shun risk and to avoid failure. The city government had not implemented the broken windows theory at this point. So, formerly elegant movie theaters began to show porn, and hustlers were not uncommon. The area was so abandoned at one point during this time that the entire Times Square area paid the city only $6 million in property taxes, which is less than what a medium-sized office building in Manhattan typically would produce in tax revenue during that time. In 1990, the state of New York took possession of 6 of the 9 historic theaters on 42nd Street, and the new 42nd Street nonprofit organization was appointed to oversee their restoration and maintenance. The theaters underwent renovation for Broadway shows, were converted for businesses, or were demolished. In the mid-1990s, Mayor Rudolph Giuliani led an effort to clean up the area. Security was increased, pornographic theaters were closed, and undesirable low-rent residents were pressured to relocate. And then more tourist-friendly attractions and upscale establishments were opened. The changes were in large part because of the Walt Disney Company, which bought and restored the New Amsterdam Theater, and as part of the contract with Disney, officials of the city and state evicted the pornographic theaters and contacted Madame Tussauds and AMC Theaters to move on to 42nd Street. This spurred the construction of new office towers, hotels, and tourist attractions in the area. The theaters of Broadway and a huge number of animated neon and LED signs have been one of New York's iconic images, as well as a symbol of intensely urban aspects of Manhattan. Since 1987, such signage has been mandated by zoning ordinances that require building owners to display illuminated signs, the only district in New York City with this requirement. The neighborhood has a minimum limit for lighting instead of a standard maximum limit. The density of illuminated signs in Times Square rivals that in Las Vegas. Officially, signs in Times Square are called spectaculars. The largest of them are called jumbotrons. This signage ordinance was implemented in accordance with the guidelines set in the revitalization program that New York Governor Mario Cuomo implemented in 1993.
And always remember, the best way to help myself and my channel is by liking and subscribing. Also, sharing the bejeebus out of my videos. Well, that is it for this time. Thanks for spending the time and taking the ride. See you next time.